Look, I am very aware of the fact that there's no one here saying, boy, I hope he really talks a long time. That may be the biggest applause line I get all night. Lord knows it may be the only one I get all night. By the way, let me clarify, when I told the New York Times reporter, Tom Friedman and Frank Gaffney, the other part of that was, I find out what Tom Friedman says, I run as far from it as possible. I found out what Frank Gaffney says, and I get as close to it as possible. He scared me when he said, here's a man who needs no introduction. The last time that happened to me was when I was speaking at a civic club in East Arkansas in my first election. People of my party didn't get elected to anything. They were rarely invited to anything. And when I got there to speak, the gentleman who had invited me didn't show up. Not a good sign. They looked for someone who would give the courtesy of the introduction. They finally found someone. He got up and this was his introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm told that our speaker today is a man who needs no introduction. And I sure am glad, because I've never heard of this guy. My first trip to Israel was 41 years ago this summer, 1973, just a few months before the Yom Kippur War. I was all of 17 years old. I guess in many ways I was one of the few Gentiles making Aliyah. But for me it was a life-changing experience because though I traveled all over the Middle East during that time, and that's a story unto itself, places that I couldn't go today, including Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, many countries throughout the Middle East. But there was something extraordinary when I got to Israel. It's the only place I've ever been in the world that I'd never been to, but the moment I arrived, I felt I had come home. And through the years, for 41 years, as I've been traveling back and forth and I've lost track of how many times I've been there, in my 20s, I started taking other people because I wanted them to see this remarkable land. And I have watched it. The incredible, amazing journey of this revived country, fulfilling the prophecy of Ezekiel that the dry bones will live again. And indeed, the dry bones are very much alive. But I'm concerned for Israel because I'm concerned that the only true ally and friend that Israel has consistently had has decided that maybe we will forget our unique relationship. The two flags that sit together on this table, the flags of the United States and Israel, represent more than something that is symbolic. Because I've always believed that the unique relationship between the United States and Israel is not an organizational relationship, but it is an organic relationship. Our two countries, unlike any two others on the face of this planet, were created by people who wanted religious liberty and who wanted their children to grow up as free, who believed that it was so important to have liberty that they were willing to literally risk their very last drop of blood to ensure that freedom would be the foundation of their culture and society, and that they would self-govern, that they would allow the people to rule by electing those who would lead them. But the power would always be retained within the people and not within the politicians or those who declared themselves to be the government. We have this unique organic relationship with Israel. And by the way, I believe that there are many factors in the extraordinary rebirth of this land, but I don't think it is possible to understand Israel apart from the providence of Almighty God. There is no other explanation for this country than God's hand. And in that, I also believe that there is no other explanation for the United States of America other than the hand of God. How else can we view a country where a bunch of farmers and merchants grab the muskets off their mantles, weapons better suited for hunting varmints than taking on the best equipped and the best trained army in the known world at the time, the British Army? And we're able to create a country out of nothing but the ideals of personal freedom, responsibility, and the notion that people could worship any way they wanted to, or for that matter, not at all. And up until recently, there has never been a doubt, not only to the United States or to Israel, but to the rest of the world, that America would always stand with Israel. And it didn't matter whether the president was a Democrat or Republican. Israel knew with some certainty that the United States and its administration would unwaveringly stand with this, our unique partner in the Middle East. Now, I am sad to say that we are giving Israel more instructions about building bedrooms for their children in Judea and Samaria and telling them to stop doing that. What we need to tell them is to build all the bedrooms you can, and we need to tell the Iranians, it's you guys who need to stop building bombs. Build bedrooms, stop the bomb, not the other way around. While we're letting terrorists go, the Israelis are turning heaven and earth upside down to find 3 teenage boys that were abducted by Hamas. And one has to wonder, why is it taking our country, our diplomats, and the geniuses at Foggy Bottom so long to find their voice and to say that as long as Hamas is partnering with the Palestinian Authority, all negotiations are off the table. Not only will we not be sending them any more money, but instead we'll be sending as much concrete as possible to build as many neighborhoods as we can for the communities in Judea and Samaria. With people like Hamas, you do not get peace with them by handing them your gun so that they can point it at your head. You get it when you take the gun out of their hands and let them know that under no circumstances will they ever be able to take the lives of 3 teenage boys from their families without an extraordinary sense of cost that they do not want to pay. And that's the message the United States needs to be sending to the world, and especially to the Palestinians. There's never been a time that Israel needs a friend more than they need a friend right now. And I want to make sure that every single American will come to understand that standing with Israel is not only politically smart, but I believe that it is simply just smart altogether. For the nations that bless Israel will be blessed, and they who curse Israel will be cursed. We need to recognize that that is a prophecy that has not been repealed. I'm going to be leaving this Saturday night for Israel. I'll be there all of next week. It'll be yet another trip, this time not with taking a group. I'll be going with some of my Jewish friends. It's always different when I go with Jewish friends and when I take like 300 Christians. Believe this or not, about 5 good Jewish men will talk louder than 300 Christian men, and all at the same time. But one of the reasons that I go is to say thank you for being a light in the midst of a very dark part of the world. And when people say, well, what's so special about Israel? I say, well, let me tell you something. As a Christian, when I go, I can visit all the Christian holy sites in Israel. And they are carefully and dutifully protected by the Israeli government, not only to allow me access, but to protect them for the value of their antiquity. I wonder how many places could I go in Saudi Arabia and say, could you take me to the churches that you were allowing to be built? I wonder how many places that I could go to in Syria and say, I'd just like to go and visit one of the churches here. If for no other reason on this earth, the entire world owes an extraordinary debt of gratitude to the government of Israel because it consistently protects not only the Jewish holy sites or even the Christian holy sites, it protects the Muslim holy sites that are represented in many cases by people who wish the Israelis didn't exist and that Israel would be turned into dust. I think that's a pretty remarkable indication of what kind of ally we have in Israel. In 1994, a young American father took his daughter to Israel. He wanted her to see the country. He wanted her to understand this unique bond between these two countries. His two older sons were mature and teenagers, ready to fully understand it, but his daughter was but 11 years old. And he took her to Yad Vashem because he knew that there was no way she would fully understand exactly what's so unique about this country if she didn't realize what the Jewish people had been put through and how close they were to annihilation and how unnecessary that suffering was had someone intervened earlier, and how only because someone did intervene did it even stop. Many of you know that in those days Yad Vashem was significantly different than it is today. I think in some ways 30 years ago, it was even more intense, perhaps even too much so. This father was concerned that his daughter might be a little overwhelmed by the graphic nature of what she would see. So he decided that he would take her through, and if it became too much, he would just lead her out. He took her by the hand, he walked her through Yad Vashem. As you remember, in those days, it was arranged chronologically so that you would first see how children were separated and isolated by having the Star of David sewn onto their clothing. Not so they could be honored, but so that they could be ridiculed and humiliated. My dog was just amazed that something like this could happen. The little girl just was shocked that somebody would do this to a child. The little girl went through the part of Yad Vashem that depicted the Warsaw Ghetto, the horrors that were inflicted upon the Jewish people who were herded into that hideous environment. And when the little girl came to the depictions and the pictures and the artifacts from the Nazi death camps, including Auschwitz and Birkenau, to which I've been 3 times, when the little girl saw those pictures, she fell silent. She stared. She read all the captions under the photos. When the little girl came to the end of Yad Vashem, you may recall that there's a guest book. It's possible to take a pen and write one's name and address. And then there's a space for comments. And the little girl reached into her dad's pocket and took a pen. And she started writing her name and address. And then she paused for a moment. The dad was looking over her shoulder to see what she might write, to see, did she get it? Does she understand? With the dad looking over the little girl's shoulder, all of 11 years old, he watched as she wrote in childish scrawl these words, words he'll never forget. She simply wrote this: why didn't somebody do something? to an 11-year-old, it became so clear. And she asked a simple question. Why didn't somebody do something? That's all she wrote. She put the pen back in her father's pocket. The little girl didn't say a word for almost 4 hours. But the father never, ever had to ask, why do people need to stand up and speak up when lies and persecution are happening, whether they're happening to you or not? If they happen to someone else, it's only a matter of time before it happens to you. And by the way, that little 11-year-old girl was my daughter. She's now in her 30s. She has 2 children. And one day I will take those grandchildren to Israel, and I hope that they too will understand that they have to be the somebodies willing to do the something. And so do all of we. Thank you, and God bless you. Honor to be with you.